Welcome. Today we're going to talk about hiring event mastery, how you can make offers to 50% of RNs that you interview. We're really excited today. I've got a very special guest, Drew Hebble from Brazen. But before we get into that, I'd love to know where in the world are you joining from? If you could share that in the chat, then we can see how far spread out our reach is. We've been doing a little bit of futurism at Applichat this week, and we came across a new platform. It's called Deli.ai, and it uses ChatGPT's technology to make AI images. We tried to use it for promoting this webinar, and it hasn't quite got the handle of using faces yet. You can see it's got some weird faces there. Apparently, if you give it more specific instructions, it performs better. But again, it hasn't learned to spell, so we're excited to be part of that. Giving it more information so it learns to do that. We tried to use it for our ads as well, but it just kind of got a little bit creepier and worse. And again, its main example was given an oil painting and make it turn into an oil painting, probably so it doesn't have to be as human. But really excited about technologies like this and ChatGPT. We're looking to implement them and love to hear if any of you are doing so as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Patrick, who's going to explain a little bit more about what we do and what we do with our guest today.
For sure. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, well, we're here. I think everyone's here because healthcare continues to be a challenge, difficult in every community, every organization. And one of the biggest challenges that we all face is that most healthcare professionals are not actively looking for a new job, and they're not out there checking the job boards for openings. So there's just not enough people out looking for jobs to fill all those vacancies. And of course, high vacancies means it's harder for you to provide quality healthcare. And for many organizations, that also means you have high expenses on travel costs, health travel nurses, travel roles as well. So employers need to get beyond the job hunters and get in front of the right people so you can get more applications and fill more vacancies. So at Applichat Healthcare, we're doing that by helping our healthcare clients fill vacancies and boost headcount with our three-step solution. And that includes sourcing passive candidates from outside of the job boards, screening every candidate to ensure they're qualified, and following up with every candidate to keep them engaged and excited about the opportunity that our clients present. So this system has led to us placing over 250 nurses last year in the US and Canada. And as an example, we work with Thrive Skilled Pediatric Care, a home care agency in 11 states. They've hired 93 RNs and LPNs so far, and that's enabled them to help many more medically fragile children that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And while nursing has been our specialty for the last 3 years, we've also been helping our clients more with allied health sourcing and have also expanded into physician recruitment as well. So one way we've brought value to our clients is by combining Applichat's non-job board sourcing methods and our personalized screening system with Brazen's amazing virtual hiring software that's part of their suite of services. We've seen lots of success together for our shared healthcare clients, and Adam and Drew today are going to tell you more about how that works and the success we've seen. So I'm going to put the link to my online business card in the chat, and people can feel free to connect with me there as well. Also connect on LinkedIn and find our other free resources online. Thanks, Adam.
All right. Thank you very much, Patrick. So before we jump into it, Drew, is there anything more you want to say to introduce Brazen? Then we can talk a little bit about some of the work we've done together.
Sure, love to hear. You know, just Brazen, maybe a little myself, kind of why I'm here, maybe qualified to speak about this. But you know, at Brazen, we've been in specifically the virtual event space for over a decade now, and we focus solely on recruiting. At this point, we actually offer a suite of talent acquisition specific products and services, really to help customers meet their hiring goals. And you know, for today, we're going to talk a lot about the virtual event part of our product suite, which has been, you know, again, something we've been doing for over a decade now. And that's actually, you know, what I came to Brazen for, was to help customers get more candidates to their events. And I really worked on the marketing side of things and how do we drive qualified candidates to events. And through my experience, Brazen actually led product for a while too. So I was became very knowledgeable on the technical side of it and the product features and really how to get the most out of that. So that's why I'm excited to talk about this, because I think it has a great combination of how you really take the marketing and how you leverage different automations and technology to hit those hiring goals. So kind of the combination of the two is really what's going to be key, I think, as we kind of go through the webinar today.
Okay, great. Looking forward to getting into it and sharing with our audience more about what's out there in terms of video interviewing platforms, because I know you have some amazing features that really are an innovation. Today, we're going to discuss one of the case studies that we worked on together. That was with University of New Mexico Health, and they interviewed over 100 RNs. Oh no, sorry, they interviewed 93 RNs, and we've also done interviews of over 100 for 2 other hospitals. We're going to use that to share with everybody some best practices for events to hire for hard to fill healthcare positions. We'll talk about communicating with candidates, how you can make them aware that this is a unique and different proposition, and also how you can enable hiring managers and recruiters to use technology to its maximum potential. So we'll be talking about that case study. We'll be talking about some of the work we've done and focusing really on how you can run events yourselves to hire more healthcare candidates. So firstly, we're going to touch a little bit on an event we've done with University of New Mexico Health. So Drew, could you share some of the reasons that you had University of New Mexico Health in mind for our first work together as a partnership?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as I think as we get into some of the best practices, you're going to see how University of Mexico Health really followed a lot of the best practices we will talk about to hit these goals. And that's really why we approached them to begin with. They had very clear cut goals. They needed to hire more full-time nurses and reduce that, that travel nurse expense out there. So they had that they knew the problem, they knew what it was costing them, and that's critical in this as well, because that's what we need to really determine success and what you need to do to fix the problem too. So they knew that what the issue was, they knew what it was costing them. What they were looking for was really a solution for that. They've been on the Brazen platform, they've been using Brazen for various other hiring events. And as as we developed our partnership, it just was a perfect fit for what they were looking for, right? They needed someone to really provide that high touch with their candidates early on, screening and so forth. So it just fit really well into what we did, and then they were able to what we did with you, and we were able to leverage then the product that they were already familiar with as well to really get the most out of that software. So it was kind of a perfect fit, and they just continued to really, again, as we'll talk about in a minute, follow the best practices that we discussed and actually help develop some of those. And that's why they saw such success with the volume of nurses, as well as, you saw early on making offers to nearly half of them, which I think really goes to show the quality of the nurses coming through as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I would also say that they have a very strong brand and are a very attractive proposition in the market there in Albuquerque. And that's a very good fit for doing a hiring event because you're trying to interview people that are already familiar with you. It's not typical process where they're applying, discovering, being screened by a recruiter, and then learning more about the institution perhaps for the first time as they go through the process. A lot of the candidates that we interacted with had already worked with people who had worked at the system or had picked up a few shifts there or at least knew about its place in the community. And that made it much easier when it came to the sourcing to find qualified people because it was an attractive proposition. On the flip side, if they hadn't been well known in the community, then going into the sourcing for this event, we would have had to spend a little bit longer in connecting with candidates and talking to them more about who the organization is and what their values are before then moving them into the interviews. The first part I mentioned, if it's a well-known brand, is a little bit easier, and that's one of the reasons I think we were able to get a high show-up rate. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit more about how they conform to the best practices, and also going to let Drew explain what those best practices are to hire for hard-to-fill healthcare positions using events. So Drew prepared this slide for us. Would you like to talk us through, and we can refer back to our case studies as well?
Absolutely, yeah. This beautifully designed slide over here. Now this is really when this is really how I break up the various key points for a successful hiring event, right? And I want to talk a little bit of best practices kind of at each stage, because each stage really does have specific items you want to make sure you address to achieve those kind of results, we saw from University of New Mexico and New Mexico Health there. And it all starts with the planning and the goal setting. Adam, I've done a number of these webinars before. I talk about planning. I always give this quote from Abe Lincoln. It's, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. It is critical to prepare for these events, right? Skipping this stage can really throw everything off for the rest of all the way through the funnel there. So when you think about prepping for an event, right? Obviously, it starts with timing and just who is participating, right? Timing is really more about how long is it going to take to get the number of candidates you want into the event. It's not just about when your recruiters might be available. Your recruiters might be available in a week, but if that's not enough time to get the candidates, it really doesn't matter, right? So that's something you work out early on. How long do we think it's going to take to actually market this event, source these candidates to get the number we need in order to have a successful event? So you start talking about timing there. And goal setting here is also critical. And I think, Adam, this is something that we've really focused on for all of our shared customers, that we set goals very early in the process, because we need these to be able to measure against, right? And, you could think about traditional KPIs out there, like, just maybe how many total candidates you're looking to interview. You can look at cost per interview, these types, but you want to go maybe a little bit deeper too and start thinking about, okay, well, what's my interview to offer ratio, right? Meaning, are we getting qualified candidates into these interviews? What's my time to hire? I'm going to talk in a minute about how we can really condense the process in this. So if we can speed up the time to hire too, hey, how does that compare to some of the other tactics we've been doing? So these are some of the goals you really want to focus early on. So after the event, you're going to be able to look back, look at the data, both qualitative and quantitative, and really get an idea of, was this a successful event for us? And the last 2 pieces I want to mention here, Adam, before we move on, if you have any other questions on the planning and prep, but it's really also thinking about how we can make this successful by identifying, maybe points in your current hiring process that you see as a challenge with these types of really hard to find candidates, right? If a lot of candidates are dropping out of your funnel because it's a very long process, and whatever, you require many steps in between or handoffs, how can we reduce that, right? Can you, maybe you don't normally provide salary and sign-on bonus, whatever it might be, information until later in the process. Could you move that up a little bit potentially? Again, all these types of things really go to how do we really cater to the needs of these hard to find candidates and really nurture them through the process. So it's really difficult to hire them to begin with. If you follow just what you've always been doing, it can be even more difficult. How can you change that around a little bit to really, set them up for success?
when it comes to planning an event, what are some of the things that people usually miss that are really important but overlooked?
Yeah, I think one of those is, and I think we mentioned earlier about, the hiring managers, like really preparing hiring managers and empowering them to make offers during the event or prepare for, okay, well, if that candidate might not be qualified for this position and they are qualified for another, here's what you should do to pass them along. I think a lot of the prep, beyond what I mentioned earlier about the timing and goal setting, is really with your team to prepare them for really how to engage with candidates in this type of setting, right? You want to make it really easy on your team during the live event, so the more you can do early on to make them familiar with the platform, familiar with what to do if, a candidate doesn't show up, or you have, technical issues, really whatever it might be. I see that as something that gets missed a lot. And oftentimes it results in not the event not being as successful as it could have been, because maybe a hiring manager wasn't aware that they could put the offer out right away, or they could extend a contingent offer, these types of things.
Yeah. No, that's a potential huge pitfall if they don't know, are we making offers or not? And we would always ask that on our onboarding call. One thing I would add there is make sure that you have enough interviewers lined up in reserve for the event. Try and plan optimistically. And if you don't get the candidates that you've planned for, then remove the reserve interviewers, because the last thing you want to do is have to turn people away or adjust too many things in the run up to the event.
I think that's a good point too, Adam, because if the ratio is off either way, right? Too few recruiters and too many candidates, very poor candidate experience, right? And then vice versa, if you have too many recruiters and too few candidates, well, then it's just inefficient, use of your recruiter's time there. So I think that's a good way to look at it. Hey, prepare for the max you might get, and you
Yeah.
can always scale back. I think that's a
Yeah.
good way to look at it.
Okay. When it comes to goals then, what kind of goals do you recommend they lay out? I know whenever we do onboardings, people usually jump to the number of hires that they want, or sometimes they just say as many hires as possible. So it would be great to know what are the specific goals that are wise to input so you know if an event has performed well.
Sure, sure. So I always think about goals as the metrics for this type of event would relate to the other tactics or that you're deploying to try to make hires, right? So when I look at goals, I look at, usually a TA team is going to have certain goals for that year already, that we want to reduce the time to fill, let's say, by reducing the amount of time it takes between a pre-screen and the interview. Or by the time for the time for a candidate being interested and actually interviewed, getting more almost micro level goals like that really help us narrow down then where in the process maybe we did very well or we need to improve on. So I think looking at some of those, especially those time to, again, from screening to interview, or from interview to offer, these types of things I think are really important in this, because throughout this process, or this webinar today, you're going to hear me talk a lot about condensing the interview process. And that's just so critical, I think, for RNs too, because they're very busy. If you have a long drawn out process,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to fall out of it. So I always I think timing is critical. And the other piece is obviously cost. Um, I think we should always have a goal that we're shooting for to hit that cost per interview, and compare that to other methods out there. Again, at the end of the day, this type of event doesn't live in a silo. It's going to be compared to other tactics you're doing. So we want to make sure we have the metrics from this event to compare to the other tactics and see,
Mm-hmm.
which is performing better.
Yeah. Great. Now, I've noted some of those down mentally so that we can lay them out to our clients in the future. Thank you. Let's move on to number 2, candidate sourcing. From your perspective, what are some of the best practices for that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you think about hard to fill roles, and today we're talking a lot about nursing RNs here. We market events and source candidates through a lot of different, traditional channels, job boards out there, programmatic job advertising, LinkedIn, this type of thing, right? Well,
Mhm.
I think when you look at that, you really need to shift what you're thinking about when it comes to nurses in particular. And I think, Adam, this is where, you know, Applichat really showcases, the power of social media marketing. You need to go where the candidates are. In this case, nurses are not on the job boards. They're scrolling through Instagram, TikTok, right? Whatever it might be. So that's where it starts. I think it's choosing the right channel for your audience. And then the next step is, once you have that channel, and that's what we've talking a lot about, the social channels you all use. It's, what message do you get out there about your organization? Why should someone want to work with you? And you mentioned earlier about University of New Mexico Health there, and how everyone was aware of their brand, and that goes a long way. So if someone's aware of your brand, or if they're not, if you can just showcase what you're about, and that's not just your benefits and your pay and all that, it's, what is it like to work there? What's their experience gonna be like? What's your culture, right? All those types of things are really what I look at, and I think, again, Applechat, you guys do a great job of showcasing when you do market, is that, hey, people have fun working at these organizations. It's a community we built. We have friends. Like, that's the kind of stuff that these candidates really want to see and connect with to move on in the process.
Yeah. And I think to discover that, it's best to speak to the hiring managers because they know the staff. And if there's several hundred to 1,000 people working at your organization, there will be golden nuggets, reasons that come forward from those conversations to discover, why did you join and why do you stay? Are there any other tips you can provide for identifying what is that value proposition that makes them different?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said about talking to hiring managers is a good idea. Also, talking to nurses themselves. I mean, I think whenever we're able to showcase a story about a individual, that allows you to really connect. So talking to the nurses themselves about why they love working there, what opportunities it afforded them, what relationships they've had, educational advancements, right? Whatever it might be. I think that's always a great source for it, because while I think, the people doing the hiring may have their own thoughts, getting it right from the nurses who really speak the language and know, the challenges, and what other nurses out there in the industry are looking for, that's a great source of this kind of content messaging as well.
Hmm. Okay, great. We,
Yeah.
for the University of New Mexico event, we're able to find a great quantity of candidates from social media, which is somewhere that employers don't typically look, or if they do look, it's not as effective. And we found to mobilize that audience, you need to make it congruent with the platform. So put up images that seem natural, as if they could be uploaded by a user, or are at the very least professional, and just an image of the hospital or an image of staff, rather than something that says we're hiring, or what is obviously an ad. And that way you can grab attention and then make it easy for them to submit their information. Don't put them on your website careers page just yet, because they don't have a lot of stickiness. You should ask them 5 to 10 questions and then call them up and move them through. That's my top tip for sourcing through social media. If anybody has any questions about any of the points, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to move on now to screening and scheduling. And I know that this is something that we have worked closely on and are always improving. What are some of the best practices around this, Drew?
Yeah. So when I focused on screening to start, the first steps in it should all be in an automated fashion, right? As you mentioned, you ask them maybe 5 to 10 questions. You want to take these candidates from seeing your ad on, Facebook, Instagram, social, wherever it might be, get a little bit of information for them, obviously contact information, but enough other information to know if they just meet the minimum requirements, right? Do they have an RN license? Do they have experience? Whatever it might be, those types of questions should always be in an automated form, because if someone does not meet those qualifications, you obviously do not want to have your team, or if Applichat's doing the screening here, that you don't want a human actually taking the time to ask them those questions. You want to automatically disqualify people right there. So that's always the first step, I think, is making sure you use some sort of automated form that isn't that automatically disqualifies people, versus either having to review a resume and reach out for other qualifications, or actually just having someone call them up. You only want to have them call them up when it's really that next step with the pre-screening there, after they pass the minimum requirements.
Yeah, really important that, especially if you're a popular organization or you have particular requirements for each specialty, to not be overwhelmed with applicants who aren't qualified. When it comes to our partnership, we handle the screening and scheduling, and we put the candidates into Brazen's platform. And we find that it's important to explain to them the tech behind the event, what they can expect on the day, and how they can navigate the platform. We actually talk them through the sign up process. If you leave them high on dry on that, I think a lot of people will drop off and not attend, or when they do try to attend, they'll have technical difficulties. You really need to assume people don't know a lot and hold their hand through that scheduling process. When it comes to the screening, we've certainly learned that your hiring managers don't have a lot of time to waste, and they will be frustrated if they get people on interviews that are unqualified for their specialty. So it's crucial to have the job description up there and make sure that each person matches every single piece of required criteria. So important.
Adam, one of the pieces I'd mentioned too, because I think this is something else your team does extremely well, which has resulted in the success we've seen so far, is the speed to following up with the candidates that pass that pre-qualification, right? Once they pass that pre-qualification, following up with them within 24 hours to ask them some further questions to really make sure that they are not only meet those minimum requirements, but then they meet the requirements for the specific departments that they're interested in. And shrinking the time from when they first submitted their information to when you're actually calling them is why we've seen also such a high volume of candidates, I think, come through. Because if you let that sit for 4 or 5 days a week, you may have completely lost that candidate to another organization, or they may just drop out of the process, whatever it might be. So that speed there, I think, is critical. And when you look at TA teams out there, everyone is strapped for time. That's really tough to do, usually within an organization, without leveraging a partner, like Applichat, because in the end, we want to be able to provide, as Adam said, this hiring manager, the qualified candidates for the interview, without having to put more of a burden on your team to do all that qualification up front and those pre-screenings and do it so quickly. That's very tough, but that's also where we see success. And that's really why I think a lot of customers have leaned on our partnership to do these RN hiring events.
Yeah, because it's so hard to do it themselves internally, to manage all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So moving on to number 4, I see you've got it a little orange hue to it, so I'm going to assume it's an important one. I think it is where really
That's
your
signifying
platform,
it's live, you know?
your platform, yeah, you have the most to say
Yeah.
about your platform. Can you tell us best practices for conducting and managing and facilitating live virtual interviews?
Yeah. Yeah. And I forgot to mention the scheduling before this, but obviously I think once you've found that the candidate is qualified, interested, and available, schedule them for an interview while you have them. I think that's something else that's been critical to the show up rate for our interviews here. So when you get to that live virtual interview event, right? I think this is also where Applichat and Brazen complement another really well. Brazen's doing virtual events for a long time, so we know how to really make the event as efficient and effective as possible. So once you get those candidates scheduled, one of the things we always like to do with these live interview events is to schedule the candidate for interview for multiple departments. If they're interested in multiple, let's have them have back-to-back interviews right while you have their attention and during the same event. Not interview for one and then 3 days later interview for another. So we schedule candidates for multiple interviews, which I think is, again, early on we talked about 50% of those candidates were receiving offers. That's a great way to do it. So scheduling them for multiple interviews, and then also, again, condensing the hiring process during that event. This is something that New Mexico Health did extremely well. If that candidate passes maybe that interview with the recruiter through the Brazen platform, they can automatically pass them on then to the hiring manager to potentially make an offer right there. Again, maybe usually that takes a couple days to have that next interview or even longer. We're doing that immediately in the event, condensing that hiring process. Candidates interested, they're qualified, keep moving them forward in the process. Do not lose that candidate. And that's really what I'm talking about. We're trying to do everything within that same event. So those are two of them: scheduling for multiple interviews in the same event, and then allowing a workflow where you can pass on the qualified candidates to the next step in the process, whether that's the hiring manager or whether that's the hiring manager passing them off to someone in the HR and people team to talk through salary, contract, whatever it might be. That's something else our customers have done that I think has been extremely effective during the events right there, is creating that workflow and condensing it all within that same event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once you have them there, you have to make the most of that time. Once they're gone, sometimes that's the end of the story. And when you have them on the call, it comes back to this thing about recruiting being like sales. Sales, you can close a sale much easier if you're face to face with someone, or they're on the phone, or they're on a video call, than if it's over email. You need to kind of go for the close when you're there, and that's what I like about your platform, because it makes it easy to do that technically.
Absolutely.
One thing I also get requests for clients, we do our events on Zoom, and we often get requests to provide them the resume before the interview so the manager can check it and ensure they're happy with it. And one thing I love about Brazen is the interviewer can actually see the resume on the candidate's profile whilst they're doing the interview. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it kind of goes to everything we're saying. Like within that event, we want to provide the recruiter with all the information, the tools they need to have an efficient use of their time. Seeing the candidate's qualifying questions, their resume, all of that is really critical when you're having that conversation, to have it right there.
Yeah. So if you're unable to use a platform like this, then print them out, at least have them in front of that manager so they know who they're talking to each time. So let's move on to point 5, next steps and follow-up, and then I'd like to go through them again and we can refer to the case study where 50% of RNs interviewed were given an offer. So can you tell me more about the next steps and follow-up, why that is an important one? Because it's often like the forgotten little brother, I think, what happens next. How do you go about that?
I think that's exactly right. Yeah. The event's done. You think, okay, we're over, right?
Yeah.
One more step in the process really makes a big difference. And I usually look at the follow-up and next steps after an event by looking at candidates in a couple different buckets, right? You have the candidates that came from that event that you want to move forward with in the process. Those you want to follow up with personally, right? If that next step for them is to come in and tour the hospital, or for a in-person interview, whatever it might be, if those candidates are moving on, cater to them, be very personal, send them an email directly thanking them and identifying what their next steps are in their process specifically for them. So that's kind of one group of candidates. The next group I look at is the ones you talk with that, okay, maybe they didn't quite meet this one qualification that you wanted for this department or preferred or whatever it might be. These are candidates maybe you want a pipeline, you want to save for later. Those are ones that you can do a mass communication to. So I always think of, okay, we want to have an email campaign ready after the event. Again, says, thank you for joining. Hey, while, this might not be the opportunity for you, we have many other opportunities. Feel free to check out our careers page, sign up for job alerts, whatever it might be. Always communicate with those candidates, because there's no saying that one of them might not come back later or might be interested in another position. So it's important not to just leave them hanging about, well, what's going on? Did they forget about me? So those types of candidates, again, you can provide more of a mass communication to. And then the last group is the candidates that didn't show up for the interview. Inevitably, there are going to be candidates that don't show up. And when we talk about nurses, I mean, they're busy, right? Things come up, their work schedules are hectic. It happens. But the important thing is not to equate the nurse not showing up to the interview as that person not being interested, not being available, not being qualified. So I also always recommend a mass communication to those candidates that didn't show up, offering them another time to connect in the future. Your response rate might not be high on those, but even if you get a few people, we know what 1-2 nurses cost to hire. If you're able to get even a couple and re-engage them and involve them in your, get them in your hiring funnel again, I mean, that can really be a way to increase the ROI from the event. So that's kind of what I look at in terms of follow-up with next steps with candidates. Break them into those buckets. Ones that you want to move forward, personal connections, personal communication, pipeline and no-shows. Yeah. Those can each have their separate, more mass communication.
Yeah, I love that last piece about following up, because we're here to make hires, and does offering them a second chance bring you closer to making hires? Yes, but even if it's doubtful, it's so little effort to send out those second invites and make sure that people are committed that it is worth it. Just the effort alone is worth it.
And that's a good point too, right? Like, it's so, it's a little bit of effort, but at that point in the process, it's not that much additional effort, and you've already done everything to move that candidate through the process to begin with. So you don't want to discount that. You still want to try to get as much out of that group of candidates as possible. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. So we opened with the title of this webinar, and our kind of snappy title was making offers to 50% of interviewed RNs. So I'd love to briefly go through how each of these steps fed into that so that people can walk away with a real life example. In terms of planning and goal setting, for me, I think University of New Mexico was really committed to making the event work. They had a large group of interviewers, they had someone checking each application that came through, and they were reasonably quick about sending out invites to candidates. Was there anything else on the planning side that they did pretty well that you'd like to mention?
I think those are the key ones. They set themselves up for success that way, and also they, as we mentioned with the hiring managers, they made sure hiring managers are aware that you can and should make offers on the spot, right? They really empowered them to do that, and they were explicit about it too. So I think that was another key point in their preparation for the event.
Yeah. And then when we look at sourcing and screening, on our end, we were given quite a broad range of positions that we were able to recruit for, which gave us a lot of flexibility in our advertising to optimize it in terms of the budget spend. That meant we were able to get more candidates for our advertising budget than we would have if it was a more limited event. And also, we were given roles where they would accept people who were a new grad or who had 1 or 2 years experience, and that made the screening also a little bit simpler and fed into how we were able to give offers to 50% of the nurses. I would say if you want to use an event to do more hard to fill positions that require more screening, for example, an ICU nurse, then lower the expectation for the quantity of interviews and try and focus in on the quality of those candidates so that instead of 20 being interviewed, it's 5, but 3 get the job. Anything else on sourcing and screening in this case study that you think was worthwhile and could transfer to other people watching this?
I think something else Mexico Health did was you kind of mentioned it earlier, but they were open to suggestions and flexible, right? Adam, we turn to you all as the experts in sourcing and screening candidates. What did you recommend, right? And I think they were open to those recommendations. Maybe they came into it thinking, oh, we're only going to do these specific departments. And as we talked through it, we said, well, hey, you guys saying we could get more candidates if we did it this way and that, and they were open to those suggestions. So I think being, open like that and flexible is also a big part of why you were able to have such success, as you mentioned, with some of that social advertising there.
Yeah, it's really easy to work with them.
Yeah.
And lastly, on the live virtual interviews, perhaps how they used the platform or how they followed up, was there anything that you'd like to commend here?
Yeah, here I think it's kind of the main points I hit earlier for that live event. They had multiple interviews scheduled. They had hiring managers available, ready to make offers, and they also had the HR or people team available to answer questions. And because they were able to tell people once they come in, based on your experience, this, and this, here would be your pay scale. This having all that available and a person that can speak to it was another way. Again, they were able to condense the process, not have the candidate interested, passing everything, and then waiting on that information. They were able to have that candidate speak to someone during the event. So I think that was also a big piece of why they were so successful with these handful of events we've run.
Yeah. So if you're watching on the live, this will be recorded so you can flick back to the suggestions for each stage, and you can also take a screenshot of this slide or follow up with myself or Patrick or Drew on LinkedIn to get the slideshow. We're going to move on to a couple more in-depth points that really do benefit an event. The first one is communicating how it's unique and differentiated. When it comes to our advertising, we like to say, get a 20-minute interview of hiring managers, apply now in 60 seconds, or receive a job offer on the spot, apply now in 60 seconds, which is a lot different to the normal patterns people see and are used to and maybe bored of here's a job, here's the requirements, here's the pay. It just stands out and it's something that breaks the chain of ads that they're seeing for jobs. It's almost as if it stands outside the job ad category because you're not offering them a job, you're offering them a 20-minute interview or a potential job offer. On your side, Drew, what are some important key points around this?
Yeah, no, I talking about the process like this is almost part of, as you're saying, the hook to join, right? You're almost saying to this candidate how you are trying to make this as easy as possible on them because you know how hectic their schedule is and how difficult it might be to try to schedule an in-person and the time it takes and all that stuff. So communicating something like this where you're talking about how easy it is to be able to join, how you're going to talk with the hiring manager directly, how you're not going to be waiting for weeks or months maybe to hear back. All of that just goes to show how much you value that candidate and their time. And again, I think that's what leads towards us sourcing so many candidates and getting so many candidates and through to the interview. They know what to expect and they know that it's better than the traditional fill out that application and wait process.
Yeah. We also have another one on enabling the hiring managers and recruiters to use the tech efficiently and it's to its max. How do you do that? Because you're bringing in people that either are new to your platform or have used it a couple of times but aren't good with technology. It's a big struggle for us getting people to use it effectively. How do you manage that?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the pieces we start on is, obviously the product itself, right? Like you said, many people on the Brazen platform, candidates, they might only use it one time. Recruiters, handful, or they could be using it dozens of times. But no matter who you are, what we really pride ourselves with that we've made the technology very user friendly and intuitive. So it kind of starts with that, right? If you don't have a user friendly technology, this is really difficult to do. Beyond that, what I would like to do is to be able to actually develop a more of a best practice guide specific for the hiring managers involved in that specific event. And that means spelling out to them, again, this event is to hire for these types of positions. If a candidate is not interested in one of those for some reason, here's what you should do, and you should click to transfer them to the people booth or something like that. So I think that's the other piece of it is not just showing them, hey, here's how you use the product, but really applying how you want them to use the product for that specific event. And that gets down to, again, those individual of, hey, Adam, if you and I are the recruiters in the event, it can even down to the level of like, Drew, you got to make sure to pass anyone that meets this criteria over to Adam. And having those types of instructions along with that really intuitive product, I think is really what makes them these hiring managers be able to use it most efficiently. You got to have the features, you got to have usability, but then you got to show them how it works specific to them, not just a generic, here's how to article kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, because everyone's going to have different questions, different suppositions, different experiences going into it. So they'll have different expectations of how it should be used. Okay.
Right. Everyone's got their own process. Everyone has their different next step or this or that. Lay that all out for them for how that's going to work within the platform. I think you're exactly right.
Yeah. That extends to any platform that you're using or any medium. We've even encouraged them to do a test run to double check that people understand in a live scenario how it works, rather than saying, "Oh yeah, I know," and then when it comes to the event, they don't know. To do it beforehand as a test is also worth the time, not a lot of effort.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna pull back onto this slide because we're coming towards the end of the webinar. Laura Hankins says, I say that most recruiters should be transparent about the process from the start. I would agree with that.
Yes.
Expectations extend to candidates as well. Is there anything, Drew, that we haven't covered that you'd like to add about how our audience can do better hiring events and hopefully reach that number of offering 50% of the interviewees a job?
Yeah, I mean, I think we hit on a lot of the key points that really apply across the board. But what's important is to focus on some of the best practices that are going to be most beneficial to your specific organization based on your specific challenges. So I feel like that's where really the consultation element of this comes in, to be able to partner. Adam, when we have a customer come in and we partner together to really define each of these steps in the process based on their specific needs and challenges. So that's the only piece I'd say is, hey, I talk about a lot of best practices here. Some may be perfect for your organization. Others you might be doing already. So how do you identify where to put your time and energy and, resources and budget in, right? That's where we can help. Coming with us, being able to look at this holistically, and you kind of take two partners that are very good at what they do, and you combine those, you get quite the solution there.
Yeah. And I've found the events of you have been enjoyable and smoother whenever you have a good technology platform like Brazen as your supporter and framework. So if anybody is watching this and is interested in working alongside Brazen or Brazen Applichat, how can they reach you, Drew?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll have, you can connect with me on LinkedIn here, obviously, but then Adam, afterwards, I think we'll be able to send out our business cards, I think like Patrick did through the chat here.
Yeah. Speaking of Patrick, going to bring him back in
and there
to
he
close
is.
things off.
Hello. Yeah, that's
Hello.
great. That's I can certainly help connect people to Drew and Adam. My business card is in the chat. I'll put it on the screen here as well. So feel free to connect with me. We also have, I mentioned, our free resources, Nurse Recruitment Secret webinar, newsletter, and Facebook group, our Healthcare Recruitment Leaders Exchange, and a number of other free resources that you can find there on my business card. And as I say, I can connect you up with Drew and the Brazen crew as well, and certainly tell you more about what we're all about at Applichat Healthcare and how we're helping healthcare organizations to get more qualified applicants. So if that's it for you guys, we're going to move into, as soon as you're finished, we're going to move into the Zoom room. If people do have questions for Adam, Drew, or myself, we'll be in my Zoom video room, and I put that in the chat now as well. So you can join there, and we will see who joins in and be willing to answer questions and chat further.
Okay, thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you, Drew, for coming along.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you guys as well.
Yeah, have a good one. See you later.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Thanks, Drew. Bye-bye.
All right.